Is there such a thing as carbohydrate addiction or carb addiction? Is there something in the human body that causes people to absolutely crave carbohydrates to the point where they just can't stop eating them? Well, let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates. The first thing you need to know about carbohydrates, and I've written this in my Applied Metabolics newsletter several times. Carbohydrates, quite contrary to what you might read or hear, are not essential to human nutrition. What the body needs is glucose. Glucose is the main product of carbohydrate. Carbohydrate contains carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and blah, blah, blah. But the point is the body needs glucose. And glucose can be made from other substances in the body, including amino acids, lactate, which is produced when you work out as a part of anaerobic metabolism, even the glycerol, which is 10% of the fat triglyceride molecule that's stored in fat cells. All of these things can be turned into glucose in the liver, and for that reason, carbohydrates are not essential in human nutrition. But that aside, I'm not trying to say, don't misinterpret this to say for me that I'm saying that carbohydrates aren't useful. They are useful. They are by far the predominant favorite energy source of the human body. The human brain is what they call a glucose hog. It uses something like 2/3 of the glucose that's produced or taken in food is largely used by the brain. It's very, very heavy user of glucose. However, ketones, which are metabolic byproducts of fat metabolism, can substitute for glucose in the brain. So even in the brain, glucose isn't really needed. But carbs do serve. They're a precursor for ribonucleic acid, RNA, which is essential for protein, muscle protein synthesis. Also, they're needed for the production of DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the genetic building blocks of the cell. They also transport molecular data, and carbohydrates are involved in cell signaling processes. There's some evidence that glycogen, by the way, is a stored form of carbohydrate. It's stored to a limited extent in the liver and in muscles. Glycogen is involved in recovery of muscle after training. Glycogen apparently basically supplies the fuel for increased muscle protein synthesis. Also, it's apparently involved in the production of intramuscular IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. So, carbohydrates could be useful. That's the point. And when you think about carbs, most people who don't study nutrition, they think about refined carbs, such as cake, cookies, pastries, white bread, pasta, rice. Now, some people might argue with me about the last one, rice and pasta. They might say, well, what's wrong with rice and pasta? Well, basically, they lack fiber, especially white rice, and because of that, it's considered what they call a high glycemic index carb, or carb which is digested fairly rapidly, which kind of puts it towards the refined carbohydrate category, rather natural. However, there's a trick I'll just mention here at passing. You can have your pasta and rice and eat it with much less worries. If you first cook the pasta, cook the rice, and then put it in the refrigerator for, let's say, overnight for a couple hours, 12 hours, 8 hours, whatever, and then next day, reheat them and eat the pasta and rice, and you'll be only getting 50% of the previous carbohydrate content. Because what happens is that when you freeze the food or refrigerate, I should say, after cooking, you convert a lot of the carbohydrate content into what they call resistant starch. As the name implies, resistant starch cannot be broken down by the body. It's kind of almost like a fiber. It can be broken down by intestinal bacteria, which is very good. But in other words, you're getting 50% less carbs. I just threw that in. That's not the main focus of this video. But the other categories, the healthy carbs, and there are healthy carbs. Healthy carbs include fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, that kind of thing. And some people would argue this, whole grain breads. Some people talk about the gluten and stuff. It's not really gluten is the problem. It's something else called, they're called food maps. It's a type of other carbohydrates. Gluten is a protein. Some types of carbohydrates under the general heading of food maps tend to cause the symptoms that some people call gluten insensitivity. But generally speaking, true whole grain bread or something like that is not that bad unless you're dieting. In that case, you should toss it out. Strangely enough, whole grain pasta is a little bit better than regular pasta. Same with brown rice compared to white rice. Now the question is, here's the main focus: are carbohydrates truly addictive, I should say? A 2013 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found strong evidence that high-carb meals stimulate regions of the brain that are associated with cravings and rewards. Using a randomized blinded crossover design study, 12 overweight or obese men ages between 18 and 35 consumed high and low glycemic index meals, controlled for calories, macronutrients, and palatability on 2 occasions. The primary outcome was cerebral blood flow as a measure of resting brain activity. The high glycemic index meal, meaning the meal that contained the more refined carbohydrates that hit your blood faster, this elicited greater brain activity centered in the right nucleus accumbens and selectively stimulated brain regions associated with food, reward, and craving in the late postprandial. That means after the meal period. Now, a little bit of explanation. I know that sounds a little technical. The nucleus accumbens. This is a particular area related to addiction. The nucleus accumbens is the area of the brain that produces a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter involved in several functions in the body. It's the neurotransmitter that gives you drive, that makes you want to accomplish stuff. It's also the neurotransmitter for for sex, actually. Basically, it's involved in increasing the sex drive or the libido. Anything that's going to increase dopamine is going to make you horny, to put it bluntly. But also, it's called the reward neurotransmitter because basically it's a feel-good chemical. When dopamine is high, you feel good, and some people eat to get that dopamine flow. And it's the same reason why people use cocaine and also amphetamines. All of these substances stimulate increased dopamine through different mechanisms. So, some of them block the reuptake of dopamine. I'm not going to get into all the physiology of neuron workings. I'm not going to do that now. But suffice to say that a lot of people, for example, emotional eaters, whatever, or addictive eaters want to get that dopamine release, and they get it mainly from refined or high glycemic carbs. Stimulates a good outpouring of dopamine in the area, and again, in the accumbens area of the brain, which produces dopamine. So, in other words, the more the carbs they eat, the better they feel, and this is a kind of an addiction. This is your carb addiction. Some researchers have gone so far as to suggest that refined carbs in the form of fructose have addictive properties that closely resemble that of alcohol. And alcohol is also addictive. Fructose is a simple sugar found in fruits, vegetables, and honey. Fructose stimulates your brain's hedonic pathway. This is, again, the hedonic is just a fancy way of saying pleasure pathway. Anything that's hedonic is pleasure. This pathway triggers appetite and influences food intake through a system of pleasure and reward rather than being based on true physical hunger or actual energy needs. In other words, when you stimulate this area of the brain, it has nothing to do with being hungry or needing energy. It's because you're eating these foods because you get this instant rush of pleasure, a good feeling. And that is exactly what you get when you use addictive drugs like cocaine. So in this sense, carbohydrate addiction is real. In one study, women ages 18 to 45 who were prone to emotional eating episodes were more likely to choose a carbohydrate-rich drink over a protein-rich one after being induced into a sad mood, even when blinded which drink contained the carb. In other words, basically, again, they're sad, they're emotional. In that situation, dopamine is down. So are some other neurotransmitters in the brain. This is what causes depression. And when they reach for these kind of carbohydrate foods, because they get that dopamine rush, which makes them immediately feel better and able to handle things a little better. Of course, it also makes them fat, but that's another story. Now, high glycemic, high fat, and processed foods. High glycemic, high fat, and processed foods are the foods most associated with food addiction. Okay, I'll give you a couple examples of foods which are associated with carbohydrate addiction. I'm sure that many of you watching this eat these regularly. I know that I do. And I'm not saying I'm carb addicted, But the number one food on the list is pizza, which happens to be my favorite food. You know, then this is followed by chocolate. A lot of women, for example, crave chocolate. They crave chocolate not only because of the sugar content, which stimulates dopamine, but it also contains a substance called PEA, which is basically almost has like an amphetamine effect on the brain. It makes them feel good. As a matter of fact, this particular substance, PEA, is also produced in the brain naturally. And when you fall in love, two chemicals tend to rise. One of them is PEA, which gives you that heady feeling of being in love. And the other one is oxytocin, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. But oxytocin makes you feel very warm and loving towards somebody. When women breastfeed, the act of the baby, getting the milk stimulates the flow of oxytocin, and it bonds the mother with the baby. It's called a bonding hormone. The third on the list is chips. Then you got cookies, ice cream, French fries, cheeseburgers, soda, and cake and cheese. Now, cheese, of course, is carbohydrate free, but it still has substances in it which tend to cause a type of food addiction. So if you eat a lot of cheese, you don't have to worry about carbs, but a lot of the cheeses are high in fat, so you're getting a lot of calories. That's a problem. So what do you do about these cravings? How can you handle them? Well, there's a couple of ways. One thing you want to do is fill up on protein. Animal and vegetable sources of protein, meat, eggs, tofu, beans. Protein, among all the other foods, carbohydrate, fat foods, protein provides the most satiety effect, meaning it's the most appetite-reducing food element or macronutrient that you can eat. So if you tend to veer towards a higher protein intake, there'll be much less carbohydrate cravings. Then you can also, if you really feel like eating something sweet, rather than reach for the refined carbohydrate like candy or soda or that kind of crap, grab a piece of a fruit. It's high in fiber. The fiber slows the release of the sugar. Don't worry about the fructose because the high fiber content of fruit also slows down the release of fructose, making fructose completely innocent. It doesn't do anything unless you eat about 90 pounds of fruit. So another thing you want to do is make sure you're hydrated. There's some research that suggests that dehydration, meaning that we basically dry out, it can increase food cravings. Of course, this is a real problem for bodybuilders. The last week of the contest, that's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for to be dehydrated, to have as little water, in between the skin and the muscle as possible, to show increased muscle definition. Of course, the problem there is it also increases food cravings. So there's an act, and that requires some willpower. But most bodybuilders are able to do that. So a lot of salty foods are high in carbs, and when you want to drink a lot of water. If you eat a lot of salty foods, reach for some potassium. Take a potassium supplement or eat some fruit that is high in potassium. The potassium will cause the excretion of the sodium. You won't have a problem with it. You want to also keep moving. Activity levels also tend to, they increase other chemicals in the brain, which oppose the addiction type of neurotransmitters. For example, endorphins. When you exercise, you increase endorphins. The endorphins basically inhibit the release of the addictive type of neurotransmitters, or they blunt them so that you don't get a real kind of craving. A lot of people, in fact, will notice that when they exercise, and I notice this is true with myself, for a period after the exercise, I have no appetite at all. I mean, for about, I'd say maybe 2 hours after I exercise, I don't feel like eating anything at all. I have no appetite. And a lot of that has to do with these chemicals that are released when you work out that basically blunt the appetite. Of course, after 2 hours, the appetite does tend to go up precipitously because the body wants to replace the calories that you burn through the exercise, but that's another story. You want to also get familiar with the triggers that cause you to, whether it's stress in your life, certain type of relationship problems. Be aware of the triggers that can cause carbohydrate cravings and addiction. And, and also if you happen to, go off the wagon and eat a good amount of carbs, don't punch yourself. I mean, it happens. I mean, there's no one it takes superhuman willpower not to ever have any of these so-called forbidden foods. So just eat it and enjoy, and then, All you got to do is the next day either lower your calories or lower your carbohydrates, work out. The sugar's burned away. You don't have to worry about it. It's no big deal. So that's about it, really, what I could say about carbohydrate cravings. They are real. Not everybody gets them. You'll know you have it because you just have this like intense urge to ingest carbohydrates. And I've told you a couple of ways around that, particularly the high protein aspect. It works well. It does work well. I know that when I dieted for contests, I actually used a low carbohydrate diet, but I also consumed a high protein diet, and I don't recall ever having any carbohydrate cravings at all. As long as I was on that high protein intake with no carbohydrates, I didn't have any carbohydrate cravings. So, and that's just me, of course. I'm not saying it's work for everybody. But that's about it. If you want to have the best information you'll ever find anywhere on nutrition, exercise science, supplements, which ones work, which ones don't, hormonal therapy, such as testosterone replacement, all the nuances of testosterone replacement therapy. I don't really talk a lot about anabolic steroids in the sense of providing, exact regimes because of ethical reasons, and it's not a good idea to do that. So my Applied Metabolics newsletter, it's not a steroid newsletter. So if that's what you're looking for, I do have articles on steroids and other ergogenic aids based on medical research. In other words, if I find new and interesting findings about these drugs, I put them in the newsletter. I also cover women's health and fitness, ergogenic aids, exercise science. I cover a very wide range of topics. There's other digital publications out there that cover nutrition quite well, if I say so myself, and some of them cover exercise also quite well. However, there's no one that covers the range of topics that I do. And I can do this because I was a professional writer. Well, I was going to say I was, but I still am. But I wrote for various commercial magazines and newspapers for 40 years. So I'm a professional. I know how to write. I can translate complex material into readable English. I try and keep it lively so you don't get bored to death. And of course, I have my own experience as a former bodybuilder and a person who's worked out for nearly 60 years. And there's not many people that are still alive that can even say that. And I put a lot of my experience into my Applied Metabolics newsletter, so you don't make the same mistakes that I made along the way. This is like a real state-of-the-art publication, if I say so myself. It's 40 to 50 pages every month, no advertisements. I'm not trying to push any products on you other than the newsletter itself. And if you subscribe, I'll send you a personal invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page. It's only for subscribers, and each day I put new information on nutrition, exercise, diet, medical topics. I'll also answer questions in my private Facebook page. And on my Applied Metabolics website, I have a email portal where current subscribers only, again, only current subscribers, I don't answer unsolicited questions, are welcome to ask me short questions related to something they might have read in the newsletter or something they're curious about. I'll be happy to answer. Again, I have to emphasize this, only current subscribers. I mean, the reason I keep mentioning this, every day I get emails from people that are not subscribers. I mean, you wouldn't believe what these people ask me. I mean, they want me to give them entire diets, training programs, stuff they pay money for to other people. They think I have nothing better to do than sit, and they're not even subscribers. I'm just going to do it for free. Right, sure. No, not me. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. But if they're subscribers, I'll answer the questions. If anyone wants to have more in-depth, where they have a lot of questions for me, I do also personal consults, either through Skype or phone. Those are for the ones that have a lot of questions or have it takes much longer to answer. That would have to be a personal consultation. But I would suggest strongly that you subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. I guarantee you will learn something in every issue, no matter what your level of education, including doctorates and MDs. I have quite a few of them who are subscribers, and they learn also, just as I learn every time I do the research for these articles. So, as I said, you won't find a more in-depth publication anywhere on the entire internet. related to nutrition and exercise and health. I guarantee it. So that's about it. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. I'll tell you, as I'm speaking these words, this COVID-19 thing is still going on. And, having a little buddy like Bruno really helps my attitude. I'll tell you that. It's good to have him around. And speaking of COVID-19, I just want to also mention, I just completed an article for the October issue. By the time you see this video, the October issue will probably be already out, but it's scheduled for the October issue. This article is by far the most complete, in-depth article you'll ever read on every single natural modality to treat or prevent COVID-19. This article alone is the size of an ebook. I'm telling you, I worked for weeks on this thing. I mean, oh God. It's in simple English. You will know everything you want to know about the relationship between nutrition, exercise, and this COVID-19 pandemic thing. So only in Applied Metabolics. You're not going to find this anywhere else. Guarantee it. So take care. Thanks for listening.